Hi everybody, welcome to this special Sunday Family Arts. My name's Austin Kwasinski, and today we're going to be taking a look at telling compelling stories using only but silhouettes. So that means we're only going to use two colors. We're going to use black and white, and we're going to look at the work of artist Carol Walker, and she does these paper silhouettes only using cutouts. So here's a good example of her work here. So these are quite large scale pieces, and they're very intricate and detailed, and usually they're telling a story of kind of what's going on in this big panorama scale. We also have one, here's a snapshot of this one in particular, and what I really like about these is that they tell a compelling narrative, but also they use a lot, they frame their images using negative space and positive space, and really creating compelling and interesting pieces of art only using the silhouette of the character itself. So some super fascinating stuff. I can't wait to dive deeper into this with you guys. So some of the materials that we're going to need for today are, we're going to need a white paper for our background. We're going to need some black paper to actually cut out our figures and what we want to tell with our story. I also suggest getting a piece of paper to draw on and to make rough sketches, and before we actually start to commit to cutting. We're going to need a pencil eraser. A Sharpie is really good for blocking out different shapes and stuff. We're going to need some scissors to, of course, cut out our shapes, and then also a glue stick to lay down the finale. Alrighty, guys. So I've already showed you a few work by Carol Walker here, and she's telling very compelling stories as far as a wider narrative of things that happened in the past, and telling that through this visual storytelling. Here's the one that was just for the demo here, and as you can see, it's still doing the same thing as this one here, is framing the figures of that we have using that negative space, using the white and then the black as the positive space of our branches and stuff like that of our trees. So it's really kind of drawing our eye right to the center of this part. So another thing I want to show is kind of what makes a good silhouette and what makes a bad silhouette. So I have a piece of paper here, and these are all famous cartoon characters, and something that is very similar with all of them is that they all have a really strong silhouette. Without even getting the details of these characters, we already know kind of who they are and what they actually come from. They're very recognizable, and we immediately know, and there's no other details that are being shown within this piece. So why is this so compelling? Well, for starters, we're using the positive space of, say, Charlie Brown here, and then the negative space as well. If I draw an X all around, we're really cutting into that form. If we have something that, for example, looks like, let me show you. If we have something, for example, that looks like this, so I'm drawing my person here, like so. This isn't really recognizable. This could be any number of things, and even though we are using that negative space, we're not really cutting into the form and kind of molding it into something that's more interesting to look at, say, for example. And this is also with the pose of our characters as well too. You know, we have Goofy that's kind of has his arms really stretched out like so, and really pushing that angle forward, right? If I were to draw a quick Goofy here, this is the body, and then his legs are coming forward and then back. This is really telling something more strong than something like this, because this is very static. It's very stiff. Not much is happening or going on. But when we start to pose things like this, it makes it really compelling. So I encourage you, when we are creating our characters, use the positive and negative space to really tell. Like, for example, in Popeye's arms, instead of it just being a blob, they cut out the inside over here to really communicate that this is where the arms are coming from, and this is the shape of his arms, instead of just having it like a blobby mess like so. We could do Popeye like this. He has kind of a body like so, And if we just did his arms, right, without really getting into details of his hat, he also has his pipe. So that's another detail to add. And then he's got his shoes that are coming in like so. But the point being is if we just did this big blob like so, it's really going to make it hard to tell what it actually is that we're looking at. So this is something to keep in mind. Another good thing is the rotation of our actual silhouettes. So we can have something that looks like a teapot, right? So this is the shape of the outside of a teapot, and instantly we know, we look at the way these lines are formed, and that's a teapot. However, if we turn it into space, think of it as a 3D object, and now the teapot spout is facing north, we get something like this. And then the back, this would be kind of like the, what's it called, the handle, but from a viewer's perspective, we don't really get to see that shape. And so it's still a teapot, but it's really hard to tell kind of what it's supposed to be or what it's supposed to be looking like, right? So if we tell something like this, and we use those actual shapes and we communicate that to our viewer, it's going to get a more clear understanding of what we're actually looking at. All right, so another thing that I want to talk about with you guys is composition. So composition's really cool. There can be multiple different ways of looking at compositions, but there's a few common ones that really work, and I'm going to kind of talk about them a little bit. So here's the 3 ones. So we have the quads, thirds, and golden ratio. So the quads is where a point in the middle is kind of meeting. So for example, this one's pretty common. It's a little bit lower, but it's starting to draw our attention towards kind of the center of the frame. And same thing if we're doing a composition like this, right? So quads is really good if we have something that is like in a 1 point perspective, and which 1 point perspective is there's a dot along there, and everything is kind of leading towards that vanishing point. So we can have buildings or something like that, and it's all kind of leading to this very same area. So that's something that would be with quads. If we break it down into center, it's all still leading into the middle. So rule of thirds is also a really, really common one, where if we kind of break it down, if we want to show more of a certain scene, we could break it down like this, and usually what happens is we're going to place our subject almost in the crosshairs like so. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So a good example of this is in cinema. Usually we'll have shots, or any like kind of concept art types of things, we'll usually have a shot where our character is in this center, or in one of these corners, and then in this corner here we have, like, for example, like say like a castle or something, right, off in the distance, and then that's a kind of like a land there, right? And we kind of see it really draws the grand scale of like an adventurer or something that is going off into the distance of a big vast area. So with the rule of thirds, we do this a lot in photography as well, is we show a wider lens to our viewer, and we really get a big sense of the scale. And again, it's our composition, these elements that we put into our scene are still following along the crosshairs, right? So this one is this guy here, and then this, which is our figure, is also on this crosshair. So you can maneuver it. You can also break these rules at the same time, but these are the most common ones that we actually start to see into practice. And then, so the golden ratio is one that's very interesting. So what happens with the golden ratio is that we can have, say, a figure like this, and then kind of a figure like this. And what's happening in the golden ratio is that your eye is starting to move around the actual composition in almost like a spiral shape. You know, our interest is drawing here, and then it starts to go over to the second figure, and then it's starting to wrap around, and then you can have like a negative space in the middle, and that's going to kind of draw your eye closer to that form. So that's another really common one as well. Again, these are super rough, so hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. But let's get started on actually doing our cutouts and making a compelling composition. So one of the things that I want to really stress, and I'm going to use the back of this piece of paper here, is doing multiple versions of this. So like what we want to do is do a bunch of thumbnail sketches of what our final picture is going to look like, right? This really helps. We could really break it down, and because we're just using silhouette and shape, we can do that really quickly, right? We can have a I'll use the Sharpie, it'll probably be easier. We can have a tree here, and then we can go like this way, and then we can have something that's kind of in the foreground. And again, we're just doing these quick comps to see what's going to work best, right? And as we do this, we start to kind of get a sense of the space and kind of what's happening. We can have something that's kind of going diagonal like this, and then have our subject kind of in the middle like so, right? So use a Sharpie, get a marker, play around and see with what kind of stuff that we can kind of come up with beforehand. And then once we get something that is interesting and we like it, we can actually start to tell a story with it. One more thing I want to say is that think of a piece of paper as a lens to the viewer to see what we're looking at, and think of it as we can do different aspect ratios of what our viewers want to be. If we want something that's a really big shot, we can use like a wide angle, say like in a cinema type of thing. Or if we want something that's a little more claustrophobic, we can use more like of a square type of thing. So this piece of paper we could get a wider piece of paper to tell more information, or we could work with in the confines of this one as well. So that's another thing just to kind of keep in mind. All right, so as far as actually cutting and laying down our groundwork, I actually have a sketch that is prepared here for us. So I'm going to cut it along, and I'm going to kind of show you what I mean as far as putting an image to kind of together. And another thing about it is we also have different elements that are working in the scene of foreground, which is at the front, middle ground, and then the background as well. So that's something that you can kind of play with. It's 3 different planes of our image. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out this one. I'm going to show you guys this composition right here. So we'll cut it out like so. And what's really great about this paper cutting stuff is that it's almost like playing with different puzzle pieces. We can get our forms that we want to actually put in our piece, and we can move it around freely and see what composition strikes our eye the most, and kind of go from that, right? So I'm just going to cut this guy out like so. And then a little trick you can do is, if you don't have an X-Acto knife or anything like that, you can poke a little hole into where we want to make a cut, and then that's going to leave us an opening to actually cut through like so. So we'll do something like this, and we're just going to cut along the middle here. So the scene that we're going to show today is a cowboy almost like ready to draw his firearm against this other cowboy. So it's a really menacing looking shot. And I'm going to show you why this one works so well, because of the way the composition is framed and presented to our viewer. There's multiple ways to show the same thing, but how we do it is what's going to make it look interesting in the end. So I'm going to leave this part to the side here just so you guys can see it. Let's cut out a few more shapes over here. We'll cut this a little bit out so we're not dealing with such a big piece of paper. Like so. All right. So I got this really big piece, and this is intentional. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut around parts that I don't need. And again, the more contrast with your shapes as far as cutting into your object and using that negative space, the more interesting it's going to look. So again, these are pretty good scissors, so able to cut really close to where I want it to actually be. There you go, we're cutting this handle. Hopefully you guys can see that. I always have a tendency to cut closer to my chest, and I gotta be aware that you guys need to see it too. Alright. So that's almost something there, but I do want to cut a little bit more. I want to make sure this shape is nice and represented. Alright, so this is a really big chunk, but I'm going to show you why it's going to work. So let's get rid of this. So if this is our scene here, this is like a little, we could probably actually make this a little bit nicer. There you go. So that's kind of a little bit of a house, and then we have this one here, which is going to fill the rest of this frame. This is actually kind of a body, and then we're going to have a figure that's going to be shown in the negative space, like so. So we'll cut this out. Another thing to mention is if you guys are making silhouettes of characters or poses that you're looking for, but don't say you're trying to look for reference and you're not quite finding the pose that you want, a really good thing to do is to actually get out the camera and take photos of yourself doing the poses. And this is really helpful for setting up a shot that you would want, so to speak. And you're going to get some really, depending on the way that your pose is, you're going to get some really interesting interesting silhouettes out of it. Like so. Alright, so we can get rid of all this stuff here, and this is like an extra hand. Like so. Alright. We're just going to cut away here. There you go. I'm going to, I think that's pretty close to what I want, but let's cut it a little bit. And again, we can kind of refine our shapes as we go. So let's just cut a little bit like that. We'll get this one right here. All right, so this is that hand that is now reaching for the gun. As you can see, this is taking up a lot of our space. We're kind of doing like a wide angle shot, which is good. And then we also have our figure here as well, like so. So we're going to cut them out. So this project's a lot of fun to do, just to, again, play with different compositions. There really is something fun about using shapes to organize and rearrange things. And using a black and white, every artist will tell you that limitations actually make stronger artwork, as far as, so if we limit ourselves to only black and white, we can really get a strong dynamic shot first, and then you start to add the things such as value and color and all that kind of stuff. And then later on, since you already have such a strong composition to begin with, the piece is going to really excel and look magnificent. So it's something to keep in mind for even not just doing this type of stuff, but even doing full-on art pieces in the future. You know, even doing those black and white comps that I talked about, those are going to be really beneficial and help you out a lot. All right, so we're getting into the nitty gritty. This is very small cutting here, so we got to be extra careful that we don't take off any information that we want to keep. All right, I think we're getting pretty good here. I'll hold it. I'll try to hold it over this so you guys can see. All right. Okay. And working with black and stuff too, sometimes it is harder to see the lines. That's why drawing it first will be probably really beneficial for you. All right, we're so close. There we go. We also got to cut inwards here. And again, this is like the Popeye example I mentioned before. We want to cut into the object so we can really see those shapes and what is happening with your figure. There you go. Looking pretty good. And we're just going to cut. Cut like so. All right. I think that's pretty close. I think I want to cut a little bit more out here, outside here though, just so you can see that. All right. So hopefully that's viewing. I might cut a little bit more because this detail is getting lost. There you go. There you go. Now you can really start to see that. So this is kind of our final shot here that we want to show. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to start to glue this down, and I'm probably going to cut the paper afterwards because I do want to work in a wider lens because I want to show more of the scene to the viewer, right? So that's something really important, you know. Sometimes a ratio like this can feel very claustrophobic and you want to show more. That's why you always see, you know, in film, something like a 40 millimeter is like a really wide shot. It shows a lot of the environment. All right. So now that I put this down, what I'm going to actually do is I have a small little ruler, so I'm going to lightly just make the line just so everything kind of lines up a little bit. I don't want everything too off. That's okay that we put a little mark there. So that way, when I put this guy down, this is really going to fill up that space. And it's going to be in line with that object as well. So that's the thing, like, instead of just filling it up with subjects and stuff, using that as a black, we can really use the black to fill up the frame and to really kind of make the viewer claustrophobic and really focus. We're framing our subject by doing this, by surrounding him with black, and it's gonna really work to our benefit. All right. So I have something like this. We're gonna put our little guy right in the middle. This will be our focal point, and again, kind of using that rule of thirds thing. He's right in line with that. So even though we are working on a 2D space, we're showing depth by having our focal point be really, really small, and then things that get closer to the camera actually get bigger in size. So this is the back. This is kind of almost like the pants of the enemy. And he's really imposing. He's taking up most of the frame here. So we're going to have him Oh, do you know what? We'll also do a line for the top too, so we can kind of measure that out a little bit. Might not quite line up, but yeah, something like that will do. Just so we get a sense of where to put this guy. And again, that negative space is really showing him grab for that gun, like so. We're about to have that duel. All right, so that's the one piece here. So what I'm going to do now, and since it is such a wide shot, I'm just going to fold it over like so. I'm going to fold it again. Let's try to get that one more time, just so it's a nice straight line. And this is going to be where I'm going to cut and make that line. Ooh, I was a little bit off. There you go, something like that. And we'll do the same thing for the bottom as well. We can probably fold it this way. Something along there. And then so finally what we'll do is we'll cut along here. It's not 100% perfect, but it is giving us a benchmark to where to actually cut this piece out. Right. Again, we went over it with the ruler, so we should be pretty close to what we're trying to do here. All right, something like that. And again, this is such a wide shot. I might throw it on a white background just so you guys can see the full thing. We do want to cut this. Okay, I'm cutting a little bit of the black that I already made just so it lines up a bit better. There you go, something like that. So if we throw it on a white background, like so, again, we get something like that. That's the finished product. So what works really good against this is, again, we're using that rule of thirds in that bottom quadrant, like so. We have this, and our main focal point is this guy, and then our opposing is kind of filling up this space, right? And what's really cool about this is that using the negative space, we're creating almost like a frame for our character, and this is really imposing because he is taking so much real estate of this, so it's really opposing to the viewer to see what's going down. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Again, one of the things that are really great is to draw out your own characters, figure out your own silhouettes, and really use this compositional stuff to tell your story the way you want to tell it. What are you trying to communicate to the viewer? Are you trying to make them claustrophobic? Are you trying to show it as a really inviting thing? Use these kind of principles to drive your story forward. And again, shapes is a really good way to do that, because before I actually place this down, we could move things around if we wanted to. I already knew what I was going to do, but if you're still experimenting at home, we can move shapes around, figure out kind of what's going to work and what's not going to work, and kind of go from there. So again, have fun with this one, guys. Try it out at home, see what you come up with, see what kind of stories that you're able to tell using this technique and using only the silhouette of a character. So that means just the black and white, no details, but also think of the space around your character. I'm going to pull this one up as another example. Think of the negative space, the way, if our character's big and small, what kind of pose, what kind of posture do they have? How do they carry themselves? Are they confident? Are they slouched? Really start to think about those things when we're starting to design and draw it up and trying to tell a story with that. So again, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Until next time, we'll see you later.